My name is Ian Rowe. I'm a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. What an incredible honor to follow that panel of grassroots leaders who are putting virtues into action. It is a great reminder that what we are seeking to achieve across the country is already happening in these islands of excellence. Like these leaders, I am obsessed with the goal of upward mobility and really understanding the factors that make a person of any background successful. A lot of my work at AEI is geared towards influencing state or federal policy. But today, I want to focus on that part of my professional identity, which is just like these local leaders. It's how do we take these ideas that we're discussing at this conference and operationalize them where it really matters, in the very Black communities that we are seeking to uplift. This August, in the Bronx, I will be founding Vertex Partnership Academies, a new network of character-based international baccalaureate high schools dedicated to the 4 cardinal virtues of courage, justice, wisdom, and temperance. And for the last 10 years, I was CEO of a nonprofit network of public charter elementary and middle schools in the heart of the South Bronx and the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Our faculty had the responsibility to educate more than 2,000 students, primarily low-income Black and Hispanic kids. And each year, we had many families enter the random lottery, but unfortunately did not get into our schools. It was a joyful experience when we could call families on the day of the lottery to say that your child has won the golden ticket, a seat at our schools. But it was heartbreaking when we had to notify nearly 5,000 families that the best we could do was put your child on an excruciatingly long wait list. Many of our parents faced racial discrimination and other challenges in their own lives. They feared that their children might as well. But these parents entered the lottery for our schools because they wanted their children to develop the necessary skills and habits to become agents of their own uplift and to build a better life, even in the face of structural barriers. In District 8 in the South Bronx, only 2% of the nearly 2,000 public school students beginning 9th grade in 2015, 4 years later, graduated from high school ready for college. That means that a shocking 98% of students either dropped out of high school before completing their senior year, or if they did manage to graduate and earn a high school diploma, they were still required to take remedial catch-up classes in college due to low math and reading scores. I share this data because as we as a country are having crucial conversations about race, it is easy to forget that the racial disparities we are seeking to close as adults almost always originate much earlier in life, long before they show up as statistical gaps in financial wealth, home ownership, crime rates, or educational achievement. If only 2% of the mostly Black and brown kids in the South Bronx or similar outcomes in other localities like Chicago and elsewhere are graduating from high school capable of doing even basic reading and math, why would we reasonably expect these same kids to flourish in higher education and the workplace as adults, starting businesses, getting married, having children within marriage, or experiencing any of the other landmarks along the path into the middle class and beyond? If we truly care about upward mobility, we must be wary of the meta-narratives that, in my experience, are dominating the worldviews of how young people shape their sense of possibility and their belief as to whether or not they can achieve the American dream. These two meta-narratives I call blame the system, and the other is blame the victim. In the blame the system narrative, the reason you aren't achieving the American dream is that America itself is the problem. According to the discredited New York Times 1619 Project, the country was founded on a lie. It was founded as a slavocracy, not a democracy. That the founding principles were false when they were written, that anti-Black racism runs in the very DNA of the country, that every institution is steeped in racism, that there's a white supremacist lurking on every corner, and that these systems are so discriminatory that the individual is powerless, and only massive government intervention is the solution. By contrast, in the blame the victim narrative, America is not the problem, you're the problem. In this conception, America is full of opportunity, and that if you are not successful, then you are the cause of your own failure. You have some pathology. You should have pulled yourself up by your own bootstraps. Now, each of these narratives have a little element of truth. In the South Bronx district I just mentioned, in which only 2% of students are graduating from high school ready for college, there's actually a cap on charter schools. If you had an idea to launch a great school, you could not. That is a real systemic barrier that a 7-year-old can't solve. And on the flip side, there's always an element of personal responsibility that must be called upon. But we cannot ignore the effect of what happens to children if they do not have the support of strong families, faith-based organizations, and schools to help develop their capacity to exercise this responsibility. As Glenn said in his remarks yesterday, youngsters without the experiences, who are not exposed to the influences, and who lack access to the resources that foster and facilitate their human development will fail to achieve their full potential. Imagine you're a 12-year-old Black boy living in the South Bronx with aspirations of working hard to achieve the American dream. Yet you are repeatedly told that there is nothing that you can do individually to achieve that goal because the system is rigged against you, or that it's your fault for failing to do so. Imagine further that this message comes from adults who claim to advocate on your behalf, and yet their message to you is that it's pointless to even try, especially if you're Black. As someone who has run public charter schools in low-income communities in the Bronx, I know how debilitating such a narrative can be for a student's hopes and aspirations. Rather than helping that young man develop an understanding of the behaviors most likely to propel him into success, the message will only teach what psychologists term learned helplessness. So together, these two half-truths of blame the victim and blame the system add up to a singular lie. They rob young people of the sense that they can control their own destiny. Over the last few months, I've presented at a number of college campuses sharing these two meta-narratives. After one of my discussions, one law student at Widener Law School asked me, well, if I can't blame the system and I can't blame the victim, then who do I blame? What was interesting about this young man's question was that he was so steeped in a narrative that questioned whether the American dream is even still real. He needed to have a culprit. And here is our central challenge. The reason we are all gathered here today and why Thomas Sowell organized the Fairmont Conference more than 40 years ago, it's that we need to provide a positive and empowering alternative, especially to this young man and all young people who are trying to make sense of the world. That empowering alternative, the counter to the debilitating blame the victim and blame the system meta-narratives, is agency. I define agency as the force of your free will guided by moral discernment. The force of your free will guided by moral discernment. Agency is a vector. It's like velocity, where velocity is not just speed, it is speed and direction. So if agency is free will plus moral discernment, where does that moral guidance come from? No one is entirely helpless, and no one can truly make it on their own. Agency is individually practiced, but socially empowered. We have to create a new, forward-looking framework of agency that young people can embrace to ensure that they can overcome the institutional forces that blame the system advocates constantly cite as insurmountable, while simultaneously animating local institutions that provide the kinds of support that young people need to succeed that blame the victim advocates constantly ignore. I propose a new framework that I have called FREE, based on encouraging young people to embrace 4 pillars: family, religion, education, and entrepreneurship. Free. If we want our children to lead a life of freedom, we need the revitalization of the local mediating institutions that we know drive human flourishing. Family is helping young people understand the importance of forming strong families, the fundamental building block of our society, as they make decisions on their passageway into young adulthood. It is not about the family that you're from, it's all about the family that you form. The R for religion is about both the power that worship, community, and a personal faith commitment can be a force for good in your own life, and also the animation of faith-based organizations, the Black church, to become even more involved in the fabric of young people's lives. E for education is ensuring that every parent has the right to choose the education that best meets their child's needs. School choice is fundamental to this vision. And the final E is for entrepreneurship. We just saw a whole group of social entrepreneurs here. But entrepreneurship is about the power of work and wealth creation and the benefits of developing an entrepreneurial mindset to understand how to solve problems within your community as a social entrepreneur. I have a new book called Agency, which comes out on Monday, so you can find out more about my free framework. But just to give you a sense of how we can build strong families for future generations, we often make these depressing proclamations of failure based on skin color, but we know the importance of family structure and the timing of family formation. There's a larger question of what children of all races should be learning to achieve the American dream, regardless of circumstance. This is why a new study from my colleague, Nat Malkus of the American Enterprise Institute, could shed new light on what to teach middle and high school students so that kids of every hue absorb the series of life decisions in their control that give them the greatest likelihood of upward mobility to overcome forces outside of their control. AEI's American Perspective Survey asked respondents whether they favored or opposed, quote, teaching students that young people who get at least a high school degree, have a job, and get married before having children are more likely to be financially secure and to avoid poverty in later life, end quote. The study showed that overwhelmingly large majorities of all Americans, 77%, and American parents, 76%, support teaching what many view as a common sense ordering of life choices, but is not always visible to the very kids that we are seeking to serve. And despite concerns that teaching these types of lessons to children might be viewed as insulting or patronizing, 7 in 10 parent respondents who were most distant from adhering to what is often referred to as the success sequence supported teaching this to students. These are people who have not graduated high school, were single parents themselves, or not working. They support these kinds of ideas. These are the kinds of pragmatic ideas that we need to bypass the elite and recognize the people who are seeking to serve, as Bob Woodson just said, often disagree with the people who are claiming to represent them. These are the empowering alternatives that our rising generation needs to hear. Something that they can say yes to create a better future, as opposed to seeking to ascribe blame for why failure is unavoidable. There is no silver bullet solution that will magically close gaps in racial outcomes, especially when those gaps have causal factors that begin very early in life. But if we know there are factors that can overwhelm whatever remnants of racism still exist, such as education, family stability, the importance of faith, and work and entrepreneurship, then our approach to upward mobility should be to challenge these debilitating messages of grievance and dependency, and instead promote the message of courage and agency. Thank you.